The enemy is fleeing, we have to pursue them. At the historic Battle of Rossbach, an outnumbered Prussian army would win a famously decisive and lopsided victory against a much larger Allied army. First, it's important to understand that in ancient battles, the vast majority of casualties were inflicted during the rout and pursuit phase, not during the actual combat. In fact, for ancient pitched battles, the average casualty rate typically ranged from about 2 to 5% for both sides, both winners and losers. However, total losses for the losing side typically ranged between 10 and 20%. This difference came during the rout and pursuit phase. In a future video, we'll talk more about what this looked like directly on the battlefield. But for this video, you need to know that this occurred for a few different reasons. Firstly, oftentimes soldiers would ditch their gear in order to be able to move faster. Imagine leaving behind the only means you have to defend yourself just in order to get the heck out of there. Secondly, whether a rout or a formal retreat, soldiers were often much more disorganized. Without the tools or the numbers to construct a proper defense, these soldiers were easily intercepted by cavalry. When you have the advantage, you must press it. When the enemy prefers to run than to fight, they are signaling weakness. It would be foolish for a winning commander not to pursue the enemy. In fact, the temptation is so profound that you can see throughout history why so many feints have been so successful. So many of the most renowned armies throughout space and time were masters at luring the enemy into a reckless attack by making it look like they were retreating, only to flank the enemy later. This is what the Prussians did at Rossbach, but by accident. Hello and welcome everyone to Pyrrhic Trader, a channel about winning infinite games. The story begins with the Prussians in kind of this rocky terrain right outside of the village of Rossbach. So they're up on Janus Hill and this other kind of rocky terrain nearby, and to the Allied army it looks like the Prussians are retreating. The Prussians are actually in the middle of a redeployment. The Prussians are led by King Frederick the Great, and basically what's going on is the Allied army has begun moving up to try and flank the hill, and Frederick actually sees this incoming, so he orders his guys to descend around the backside of the hill to begin flanking the enemy. And he knows that because they're going down the backside of the hill, they're not going to be in line of sight of the enemy, so the enemy's not really going to know what's going on. And they were all previously in tents, so they're all picking up their tents immediately, and they start marching away from the enemy. And not only have they picked up all their tents, but it really looks to the Allies like Frederick is giving up some really advantaged terrain. So, why would you be giving up this great terrain? You'd have to have an extreme lack of confidence in order to be in a position where you still think you need to get out of there. And this is actually somewhat reasonable or plausible if you look at the Allied army. The Allies outnumber the Prussians 2-1. The Prussian army is about 21,000 and the Allies are about 42,000, something like that. So the Allies are looking at this and they're thinking, man, these guys are really hightailing it out of here. So from their perspective, they're thinking, the enemy is signaling that they're weak, they're not willing to fight, they've lost their nerve, they're running away, they might not be as organized. Depending on their level of haste, they may have left some equipment behind. There's just a lot of possibilities that this army is not ready for a fight right now from the Allied perspective. And this is going to cause the Allies to really aggressively overextend here. We'll get there in just a minute though. Sometimes Frederick the Great is attributed with having constructed this kind of like master feigned retreat here. It's not necessarily obvious whether this was intended or not, but it does seem like he maybe took some measures in order to create some sort of retreating facade, even if that wasn't the primary intent. And so, like for example, it sounds like he took some actions in order to like stir up a bunch of dust, and this would have made the movements really obvious to the Allies. So he may have made it look like it was a retreat. He may have intended for that part, but really the kind of primary role of this was specifically tactical. And one of the things that I love about this battle is, right away, before this battle even really starts, we can see that Frederick has already set himself up for victory. He's taken some key terrain that gives him the ability to see what's going on with the enemy, but the enemy can't really see what's going on with his army. So he has this like information asymmetry that's super duper important. And on top of that, he's already occupying high ground, so he can easily move down to attack the enemy when he wants. And if he stays on his hill, it's going to be difficult for the enemy to attack him. So he has an asymmetry there as well. Another thing about the Prussians is, I think up until this point, they're somewhat known for their ability to redeploy, but after this, they're definitely kind of famous for it. They're best in class for getting their dudes on the field as quickly as possible. And so he has this kind of major advantage that just comes from the way that they specifically train, and he's really leveraging that on the field right now. And it turns out that the terrain is really favorable for this skill set too. Now, at the same time the Prussians are moving around the backside of the hill trying to set up a flank on the incoming Allies, they're also moving some artillery pieces up onto the hill. But the Allies aren't going to be able to see this until those guns are already on top of that hill and ready to fire. So the Allied army is pushing up. They're marching in these columns. They're not trying to march up the hill or attack it directly. They're kind of marching at an angle. They're going to go south and try and establish this position kind of outside of the Prussian defenses, and then hopefully later force a direct confrontation. And from their perspective, they're thinking that they can maybe intercept some Prussian supply lines. But you can see how dangerous this plan is just by the number of steps. Their plan is to basically march into position, wheel, continue marching, and then redeploy, and then fight. So there's like a lot of moving pieces in this kill chain. They're going to move a lot of different guys up this hill. They're going to be marching for a bit of time. They're going to be potentially exposed this entire time. They're going to do this redeployment, which is always a pretty dangerous sequence. So these guys are all marching up in columns, but you don't want to be fighting in columns. You want to be fighting in rows. And that's because when you're in a row, you have greater ability to return fires because you have more surface area relative to the enemy. When you're in columns, the guys at the back can't shoot. But when you're in rows, you can get a lot more guys attacking at once. And you also want to minimize depth, and that's because if you have a lot of depth, then enemy fires can come in and they can hit a lot of guys at once. So you can imagine like if you took all of the bowling pins and you set them up in 2 rows and you rolled the ball, you can probably punch a hole in that line and get a few pins. But if you can put them in 2 long columns, one good bowling ball will be able to get all the pins in one shot. So they're in this like pretty precarious position as they're marching pretty dang close to the Prussians, and this is all contingent upon what their assumptions are about this battle in the first place, which is that the Prussians are retreating, and that in fact they're not. The Prussians are actually gearing up for a fight, and the Allies aren't going to be ready for it. Anytime you have to maneuver a lot of guys, there's just so much opportunity for delays or mistakes or things to go wrong or whatever it is. And I thought this is pretty interesting because like if you look at the ancient Romans, their kill chain is like pretty simple. If you look at a lot of their battles, it's just like show up and fight. There's not a lot of flanking maneuvers. They don't use a whole lot of different technologies or different resources. I'll have another video that goes into more depth, but if you can just go and fight the enemy and you don't have to worry about making all these precise maneuvers in time without getting shot at, all this kind of stuff, then that's a much more robust way to deliver your warfare. So the writing is on the wall here. You already know where this goes, but the Prussian artillery pieces crest the hill, and then they begin opening fire pretty shortly after at this column. It's kind of at an angle, so it's not quite flanking fire and it's not quite enfilade fire, but it's causing a lot of havoc. And then at the same time, these Prussians that are moving around the backside, a lot of this is cavalry, and so we got artillery coming in from the left of this column, and then this cavalry has moved around, is now attacking from the right. So the column is getting attacked from both sides at once, and it's kind of just this like pure chaos combined arms maneuver. So the cavalry attack in these 2 waves, and so it's a pretty quick battle. It's like about 90 minutes of actual combat. With just these 2 cavalry rushes, there's about 4,000 casualties on the Allied side. Because the Allied army is about 40,000, this represents a 10% loss. So pretty devastating here in a very short amount of time, and that causes this column here to immediately break out into a rout. So immediately they're breaking formation, and these guys are just running. They're dropping their equipment. They're just trying to get the heck out of the battlefield. So there's this kind of interesting dynamic here where this Allied army is moving in, thinking that they are pursuing a retreating Prussian army, but it turns out that they're actually just in the middle of this like redeployment. There's no retreating at all. It's not even clear whether it was an intended feint or not, and yet the Allies are the ones who end up in this pretty extreme rout. And while they're fleeing, there's about another 4,000 casualties as well, something like that. So the total Allied casualties ends up being somewhere between like 8 to 10,000. So about 25% of the army is lost in just this one battle. So extremely decisive. Prussian losses, on the other hand, are about 500. They've lost about 500 of their 21,000 people. So there's a pretty big asymmetry there. Had the Allies believed that they were not pursuing a retreating army, they may have taken a more cautious approach, maybe marched further from the hill, away from any kind of like plunging fires that would have let them redeploy much more safely and wait for a more favorable engagement. But they just went full send, and that's what put them in this position. Once the Allied army had begun this march, they'd really thrown away all their optionality. So they were now full commit on a plan that just really didn't have any outs and wasn't going to work. One of the things that I keep coming back to with this battle is I imagine that there was some portion of the leadership that could have figured that maybe there was a chance that there were maneuvers happening behind this hill that the Allied army did not have visibility to, and that it might behoove them to take a more cautious approach. And even without trying to predict what the Prussians were up to, they could have seen that they were within range of any kind of artillery fires from this hill. So they knew that marching was at least dangerous in principle. But then I also think about what it would have looked like for those commanders if they had advocated for a more cautious approach. Their leadership in turn may have been like, man, you didn't pursue the Prussians when you had a really big advantage. You did not take advantage of this opportunity. You could have done some real work here, but you kind of neglected your duty. These officers could have been reprimanded or fired for what would have appeared to be a cowardice, basically. It could have looked really bad, not only in front of their leadership, but also in front of the common soldier. I'm like, good luck trying to have a career if literally everyone thinks that you blew it. So I think that there's this tremendous incentive from command to pursue, even if it's a little reckless, and even if they know it's a little reckless. So I don't know if this is the way that Frederick had intended it, but I think that on some level, he won this battle not only through his tactics, but also through the rumor mill. In the future, I'll do a remaster of this video, but this is all I have time for. I gotta get something out today. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. If you liked today's episode, please like and subscribe, and let me know what you think down in the comments below.